Well, it all started many centuries ago with a boy whose name was Yamato. He was a Chinese child with black curly hair who was destined for greatness. He was the son of a great samurai warrior who was known as James the Great Dragon Slayer. At the age of 10, Yamato watched his father getting killed by the scaly talons of the Dragon King himself. He saw it from a bush which was located near the battlefield. Yamato cried as he watched the dragon ravish his father. He saw its black scales had been turned red from his father's blood. He wanted to jump out of the bush and scream no. It was horrifying to watch. Then tears started to drip from Yamamoto's eyes. He wished he was bigger and stronger, but he knew there was nothing he could do against such a ferocious beast. But he didn't care. He tried to walk out of the bush to confront the dragon, but his legs wouldn't let him. He was terrified about what might happen. It would have been suicide if he breathed, let alone tried to kill such a aggressive creature. It would have torn him from limb to limb. He wished he could have somehow saved his father, but he knew there was nothing he could do against such a dangerous creature. Then he saw the dragon rise up into the sky with claret dripping from its wings. He went back to the village and told his mother and four brothers the bad news. They all got upset, but none had been as close to the carnage as Yamato. For a few months, Yamato had nightmares about the night of his father's death. Some nights he saw what could have happened had he have stepped out of the bush where he hid. He feared that one day the dragon would return to destroy his father's amulet. This pendant had been around his neck since he was a little boy, and he would not part with it, not even if his life was at stake. For the amulet had the powers that could weaken dragons, making them easier to kill. For many years, his father's death haunted him, and the hate and hatred boiled inside of him like a burning candle that wouldn't go out. Its shimmer and glow wouldn't go. It tormented him day in and day out. It played on his mind like a broken record that just wouldn't stop playing. He started to hate the colour black because whenever he saw it, he remembered how his dad was defenseless against the dragon. At the age of 16, Yamato felt like as if he was ready to lash out at the killer of his father. That deadly creature that all men feared, but not him. Not no more. He would rather die than live his life in fear of a monster that rules over fire. He trained each day since his father died, and now he had abnormally large muscles. He was 6 foot. His blood was the blood of a dragon slayer, and he wanted to live up to the name of his father. He felt like as if it was his obligation to defeat the Dragon King and his four brothers. So one day he decided to go to the blacksmith, which was on the top of a small hill. He got there and the blacksmith shouted, Yamato, hurry! I have weapons that can help you in your journey. So Yamato ran to the top of the hill to see the blacksmith's shabby little hut. It looked like it was going to collapse. It was made out of wood, but it looked like termites had been using it as a three-course meal. He saw the blacksmith stood at the door. Then he asked, How can you help me defeat the monsters that killed my dad? The blacksmith looked at him for a minute. Then he said, Follow me, and walked into his workshop. He walked into his workshop, and Yamato closed behind. Yamato looked around, and he saw a sword on the table. It was glowing red. Inside, he saw a sword on the table that was glowing red inside of a little fire next to a mallet. He knew that was the way the blacksmith made his weapons. He followed, gawking at everything around him. and looked at the walls where the blacksmith hung his weapons. There were thousands of them. They finally arrived at a dead end. Yamoto started wondering whether or not the blacksmith was going to help him or just educate him. Being stood in front of a bookshelf wasn't really helpful. Then the blacksmith pushed the bookshelf. It was a hidden room. As they both walked through the door, it was dark and Yamoto couldn't see his own hand in front of him until the blacksmith lit a candle in the middle of the room. There was a table, and on it was a sword. Yamoto felt a connection with the sword, like as if he had been seeing it before. It was... 1 minute. He felt like as if he could hear it calling to him. The blacksmith started to talk and said, "This room was the last place I saw your father. He brought me here to forge a sword from dragon's blood, that you may kill the dragons. He also told me if he shouldn't return, I should give you the sword. It's your birthright. He told me to tell you to be on your guard, because it isn't easy being a dragon slayer." A psychic lady in Balfamore village told him you would destroy the dragons. She said one day you will become the king. I wanted to know what your father meant when he said this, because when I saw him he was mumbling, and in a rush he told me that you'd watch him die, and he needed me to watch over you until you were ready. If dragons got you too early, they'd have destroyed you. For not only do dragons know of you, they fear that one day you will destroy them. That is the reason they send things after you. Things that can enter your thoughts. And then he told me, you must never, ever, ever take off your medallion. If you do, creatures will be able to destroy you from the inside out. So Yamoto walked to the table and picked up the sword, and and the power he felt between his fingers was unexplainable. It felt like as if this was what he had been searching for his whole life. He swung the sword, then the blacksmith heard the sound of trumpets, and the blacksmith shouted, "Dragons! Here! Hide!" But Yamoto wanted revenge so much that he wasn't thinking rationally. He walked out of the blacksmith's secret room, but as he did, the blacksmith dived on him and said, "You're not ready." Yamoto threw him off and shouted, "I am ready." The blacksmith said, "You need to wear your armor at least." But Yamoto didn't listen. He charged through the streets and into the village to see a red dragon at his house. He screamed, "They aren't having my mother as well. No way!" He got to the dragon and swung the sword at its tail, chopping a tiny bit off. Then it turned around and spat flames at Yamoto, but he dived underneath them, and with one swift swoop of his sword, he cut the dragon's head in half. Then it fell to the floor, and the villagers applauded Yamoto. For a few years, from this, he earned himself the title Dragon Slayer. That night, the village had a feast to celebrate their victory, and the meal they ate was dragon soup. But Yamoto wasn't happy, because this wasn't the dragon that killed his dad. The dragon had a sweet taste. It was a whole heap nicer than chicken. It tasted like a mixture between ham and turkey. It was one of the most exotic and highest priced meats because it was one of the most exotic and high priced meats because it was hard. It was a hard creature to capture and kill. Meanwhile, the Dragon King and his three brothers were wondering why their sister hadn't arrived back yet. They knew the Slayer had a son, but they never knew that son would be ready to face one of them yet. Then a dragon spoke and said, "Dear brothers, we need to destroy the Dragon Slayer and stop the prophecy becoming true." Then randomly, then one randomly said, "How are we supposed to do that?" The king replied in a sharp voice, "We shall take his family, then we shall drain his blood, for we must eat soon, or else we die. The Slayer is the tastiest meat you'll ever eat. You have to try it, brothers, for it tastes like heaven. You'll love it." So they left for the Dragon Slayer's house. They flew and gripped the Dragon Slayer's youngest brother, and the Slayer wasn't in. He was collecting water at the lake when all of a sudden he heard the trumpets blow. He ran down the street to see dragons flying off with his family in their talons. He couldn't let them kill the rest of his family because he loved them. He chased the dragons on foot, but their wings propelled them to make them a lot faster than any man, even a slayer, could run. They arrived at a cave and put Yamoto's family in chains. He lost them, and the slayer didn't know which way to go. Then he heard the blacksmith shout, "Wait!" So he stopped. The blacksmith seemed to have a bag of arrows and a bow and armor in his hands. Yamoto was pleased that he decided to turn up when he did. He asked, "Do you know where the dragon fortress is?" The blacksmith nodded his head to indicate that he didn't know the answer to the question. Then he said, "Not too far from here is a village, and in this village there is a wise man who can tell you how to find the dragons. His name is Jordan. He shall guide you to the cave." Yamoto took the armor and put it on. He put up the bag on his shoulder with the bow and arrow in his hand. Then he asked the blacksmith to guide him. The blacksmith couldn't refuse to help the son of an old friend, so he started guiding the way. It was a long walk through the valleys and mud, slate and snow. After a few days, they rested without any cover or no way they could keep themselves warm out in the cold air of autumn night. They woke up at sunrise and walked a long journey until they finally reached the river. That was the entrance to the city. As they arrived, Yamoto seen a fear in the blacksmith's eyes that he hadn't seen since he was little, and his father was going to battle the dragon. Yamoto remembered the look of courage his father had in his eyes, and yet he also remembered the fear he could sense deep inside his father's heart. He remembered his mother's sweet voice calling him to come down for breakfast, but he wasn't hungry. All he wanted to do was see his father triumph. Then the blacksmith spoke. These memories faded like a stain in a washing machine. I'm going to leave it there. I wrote this one when I was younger. There's more in this, but I just thought I'd give a snippet. I haven't finished this story, but this is another project I think I'm going to go back to. And it's called Black Rage.